Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to congratulate the members for Manchester Central, Bromley and Chislehurst, Sutton Coldfield and Tottenham for bringing this debate, and also to the Backbench Business Committee for enabling us to have this time today. I also represent some of the family of Alex Henry that my colleague from Ealing North, who's not currently in his place, went into in some detail. Alex Henry was involved in a fatal street fight in Ealing in 2013 and has spent 4 years in prison, serving 19 years under joint enterprise. His mother, Sally Halsall, is my constituent, and last October I met her, Alex's sister Charlotte, and my honourable friend for Ealing North, and the honourable member for Sutton Coldfield, where I really came to understand the importance and significance of joint enterprise and the need to review the law. So in August 2013, Madam Deputy Speaker, Alex Henry went shopping with 3 friends. A confrontation took place that lasted just over 40 seconds. It's not clear why the confrontation took place. It may have been triggered by a stare. One young man had used a knife from within a bag. He stabbed 2 brothers, one of whom tragically lost his life. On the 6th day of the trial, the man with the knife pleaded guilty to murder and GBH with intent and was sentenced to 22 years, while Alex Henry received 19 years, despite never touching the knife or even being aware of its existence, only 4 years less. Since Alex's conviction in March 2014, his family have campaigned tirelessly with JENGBA, the Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association group, to reform the law of joint enterprise. The injustice, as the family saw it, was that traditionally, to be found guilty of murder, the Crown need to prove that the defendant inflicted the fatal harm while intending to kill or commit at least very serious harm. Conversely, under joint enterprise, the Crown only need to prove that the defendant foresaw the possibility that the crime might happen rather than intend and know it would happen. This means that it's easier to prove the guilt of the accessory compared to the principal offender. So in Alex's case, the Crown needed to prove Alex foresaw the possibility that the stabbing might happen rather than intend and know it would happen. There's no evidence in Alex's case that he knew about the possession of the knife and therefore that someone might be stabbed. However, the Crown persuaded the jury by arguing friends tell each other everything, and therefore Alex must have known that the other man in possession of the knife that day and Alex must have foreseen the possibility of its use if any altercations were to arise during the course of the shopping trip. Friends tell each other everything, therefore it could have been foresawn. What a shocking indictment of the way the law works to lock up a young man for so long. So in February 2016, the joint enterprise law was successfully reformed, as we've heard before, and rather than foresight, the Crown only need to prove that the defendant intentionally encouraged or assisted the principal offender while knowing the crime would take place. The law of joint enterprise has convicted thousands of men, women and children, 800 of whom are being supported by JENGBA. However, the courts have ruled that the change in the law will have no automatic retrospective effect for out-of-time appeals, which is every case convicted 28 days or more before the change in the law. So instead, those out-of-time appeals will only be afforded an appeal if the defendant can prove there's been a substantial injustice in his case, which means proving that the change in law would, without doubt, have made a difference. However, this is an impossible test, as the case of Regina versus Anwar in 2016 found. The evidential bar has not been raised by Jogi. In particular, presence at the scene of the offence can amount to encouragement of the crime. Moreover, proof of the defendant's intent to encourage, coupled with his knowledge that the crime would happen, can be inferred from the friendship of the co-defendants, the same way foresight was inferred before Jogi. Therefore, if nothing more evidentially need to be shown, since the change in law, how can a defendant prove that the change in law would have made a difference? Comparatively, those who have suffered a misapplication of the law changed in Jogi within 28 days of conviction need only show that the conviction is unsafe in that the misdirection might have made a difference. So far, no out-of-time case has succeeded on appeal, including Alex's appeal, which was also rejected. So my honourable friend from Tottenham, who's no longer in his place, in his excellent report on black and minority ethnic people in the justice system, he quite rightly shone a light on the unacceptable inequality in the CJS for young people, and particularly from those communities. But there are two other factors at play which I think were particularly relevant in joint enterprise. That of maturity, and many of the people convicted under joint enterprise are not within full maturity, and the justice system is beginning slowly to understand that young men under 25 are not mature and need to be considered slightly differently in legal cases, that maturity must be a factor in their case. And the other factor is that of autism and the autism spectrum. So in Alex Henry's case, his diagnosis of autism was important. Despite having many problems from an early age, no one had suggested to Alex's family or to Alex that he might be on the autistic spectrum until a viewer of the documentary made about the case was broadcast and wrote to the family. Alex's family then arranged for Alex to be assessed by Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, the leading academic on autism and Asperger's syndrome in this country. Professor Baron-Cohen's report on Alex states that it's incredibly unlikely that Alex could have foreseen what would or might have happened in those 40 seconds, since, due to his autism, he cannot predict the actions, behaviours or the intentions of others. The Court of Appeal rejected this ground because Alex's mother has a PhD in psychology, and so she could have coached Alex in how to act autistic. This is shocking. The court also said they couldn't understand why Alex was diagnosed so late in life, age 23, despite 7 previous mental health assessments which did not result in a diagnosis. This, certainly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to very strongly support what the Honourable Lady is saying about the judgment of the court in respect of autism, in respect of that case. I have read that case, and I find, as a layman, the response of the court completely inexplicable.
Thank you so much to the honourable member, because anybody who has had any contact with people, particularly adults, later diagnosed with autism, we know that autism often is not diagnosed early, and many people go through many difficulties in their life before the diagnosis is found, if ever. And Alex was one of those unlucky in this situation. So because autism is an invisible disorder, many assessments found traits of autism as highlighted in Professor Baron-Cohen's report. Many have been caught and this could be a factor in their appeals. But the refusal on Alex's appeal has left the family devastated, as this House can imagine. But they are determined to see that he's proved innocent. In their view, he is not a murderer, and in my view too, from what I know of the case. So how many people in prison under joint enterprise have undiagnosed autism? We need to look at this as well. Anyway, since Alex's appeal was rejected last year, his sister Charlotte applied to challenge the substantial injustice at the Supreme Court, and his family are also taking his case to the European Court of Human Rights. They believe that joint enterprise breached Article 7 of the ECHR and the principle of legality, which holds there shall be no punishment without law. Therefore, since those convicted under joint enterprise were not actually convicted under a true law, their presumption of innocence under Article 6(2) remains, which is breached by a need to prove the change in law would have made a difference. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I now have the pleasure, the honour to sit on the Justice Committee, and in October the committee wrote to the Chair of the Law Commission to suggest it would be of value for the Commission to review the law of joint enterprise, given the lack of legal clarity in the wake of the Jogee judgment, particularly on how juries should be directed on the question of intention. And unfortunately, the final version of the 13th programme of the review admits any work on joint enterprise, but I know that the chair of the Justice Committee will continue to be pushing these points.
I'm sure that the committee will want to pursue that point the Honourable Lady is quite right. But of course, there's nothing to stop the government themselves asking the Law Commission to carry out a review, as has happened, of course, on a number of instances in the past.
And like the learned and honourable member, I also look forward to the Minister's response today. The Justice Committee also wrote to the DPP, as has already been heard, suggesting clarification on the intention of the defendant. I support the calls by my honourable friend from Manchester Central, clear demands, proportionality, the need for proper data, a review of the CPS guidance and a review of older cases. All of these are essential, and we look forward to the response of the Minister on all of those issues. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the sake of Alex, the thousands of others imprisoned under joint enterprise and their loved ones, I support the calls of colleagues across this House that this injustice be rectified. Let's right the wrong, and if we really want to address knife crime, let's learn from those places that have actually brought knife crime down.